Okay, let's dive into this. You look around the world today and, well, it's hard to miss, isn't it? It may be more visible than ever, this reality of suffering, of injustice, oppression. The source material we're exploring today really zeroes in on this, using the term Zulm, and it points to situations that are, frankly, heartbreaking and on everyone's mind: Palestine, Gaza, Xinjiang, Yemen. You know the list.
It's overwhelming sometimes.
It really is. And seeing all that makes you ask these huge, difficult questions like, why? Why does this kind of profound wrong actually happen?
And maybe even more puzzling, why does it sometimes seem like it just carries on, like unchecked?
Exactly, that feeling of why isn't something stopping this?
It's a question that feels ancient, really. When you witness suffering on that scale, it really challenges your sense of fairness, maybe your understanding of justice, divine or otherwise, how you think the world should work.
Absolutely. And our deep dive today, well, it takes us into one particular way of looking at this huge puzzle. We're drawing from a specific text within Islamic thought. It looks at how Zulm is understood, but maybe more critically, how its existence and, I guess, its ultimate fate are tied to two really fundamental divine attributes.
God's absolute knowledge, al-Alîm, and his absolute wisdom, al-Hakîm.
Yeah. So the mission here is to sort of unpack that, to go beyond just seeing the Zulm and explore how this framework understands it.
How do these ideas, divine knowledge, divine wisdom, give us a lens, a way to maybe understand why oppression exists, and crucially, what this source says its ultimate end will be?
Okay, so let's start right there with Zulm itself. The source, it doesn't mince words. This isn't just presented as, a small mistake.
Not at all. It's described as one of the absolute gravest sins imaginable in this tradition. Immense weight is given to it.
You can feel that weight in the text.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the source notes how often the words Zalim, the oppressor, and Zulm appear. It says over 300 times just in the Quran.
Wow, that's significant.
It really highlights that this isn't just about individual bad actions, It strikes at the very core of justice, of how society should function. And the consequences aren't just, like, earthly problems.
Right.
It's explicitly tied to being excluded from divine mercy in the hereafter. There's that stark quote mentioned saying God's promise doesn't extend to oppressors.
Okay, that definitely sets a serious tone. So if Zulm is that profoundly wrong, that consequential, how does divine knowledge, al-Alîm, fit into the picture? How does it relate to Zulm actually being present in the world?
Well, al-Alîm, as the source explains it, means Allah's knowledge is absolute, perfect, infinite. But what's really interesting here is the emphasis on the scope of this knowledge when it comes to Zulm.
Meaning it's not just knowing the act itself.
Exactly. It's not just seeing the outward oppression. The text says it penetrates all the hidden layers.
Like the secret plans, the intentions behind it all. The source talks about knowing secret meetings, hidden plots, even the darkness in the hearts of those who feel powerful.
Precisely that. Every single detail, no matter how small, no matter how hidden someone thinks it is, it's perfectly known. The source is really clear. The knowledge of Zulm is not hidden from Allah.
Okay.
It's not just observed, it's fully registered. Yeah. Every dimension seen and unseen.
Right. But okay, here's the question that immediately jumps out then.
Yeah.
If Allah knows everything, every plot, every act, every single tear, why the delay? Why does it sometimes look like oppressors are actually succeeding, like they're getting away with it?
Yeah.
That's the puzzle Alîm seems to raise, isn't it?
It is, and it's a crucial point the source tackles directly. It argues that the seeming lack of, immediate smiting isn't a sign of ignorance or indifference.
Okay.
It's actually the opposite, according to this text. It's presented as a situation that is entirely within that absolute knowledge. It's managed by it.
Managed by the knowledge.
Yeah. The text quotes that verse from Surah Ibrahim. Never think that Allah is unaware of what the oppressors do. Then it adds, He only gives them respite until a day when eyes will stare in horror.
Ah, respite. That word feels important. A calculated delay then, not just random chance.
That's exactly how it's presented. The time frame isn't arbitrary. It's a conscious deferral. Fully known, fully measured.
So, the fact that an oppressor might seem to prosper for a while, this perspective says that's part of the known plan. A deliberate postponement.
Precisely. A prelude, you could say, to an absolutely certain accountability. Especially, the text emphasizes, on the day of judgment.
Okay, and this must be where the second divine attribute comes in strongly. al-Hakîm.
Yeah.
The all-wise.
Yes.
So if al-Hakîm explains that God knows about the delay, then al-Hakîm, as the source suggests, helps us understand why. What's the wisdom? Why allow Zulm to seemingly persist?
Right. Al-Hakîm means Allah acts with ultimate purpose, profound meaning in absolutely everything. So wisdom here points to this divine order, this purpose that might not be immediately obvious to us, from our limited viewpoint. The source argues that just because Zulm isn't instantly wiped out, it doesn't mean justice is missing. Instead, it's serving deeper, wise, divine purposes, these hikmet.
So the existence of Zulm itself, as awful and wrong as it clearly is, it isn't meaningless in this framework. It actually serves some kind of purpose.
According to this text, not meaningless at all. It's presented as something occurring within the vast scope of Allah's wisdom, serving a series of these hikmet, these divine purposes.
Okay, so what are some of those purposes? What kind of deeper meanings does the source talk about?
It gets pretty detailed. First, it's framed as a crucial area of trial. Imtihan.
A test.
A test, exactly. Humans have free will, responsibility. The Zulm is presented as one terrible potential outcome of that free will. If the option to oppress didn't exist,
Then the choice for justice wouldn't mean as much.
right, the meaning of choosing justice or patience or resistance, it would be diminished. The source connects this to the Quranic idea that life itself is a test, to see who is best in deeds.
So both the oppressor is tested by their choice to do wrong, and the oppressed are tested in how they respond. Patience, resistance, seeking wisdom.
That's a core part of it. Second, the source suggests Zulm can act as a catalyst for societal consciousness, for awakening.
How so?
Well, sometimes oppression can shake people, communities to their core. It can lead to major shifts, inspire movements for justice, even transform whole civilizations. The text gives those powerful examples from the Quran.
Right, Prophet Musa and Pharaoh.
Exactly. Prophet Yusuf rising up after his brother's Zulm, even Hajar's desperation in the desert, leading eventually to Mecca and a civilization.
Wow.
And it also mentions the destruction of arrogant, oppressive cities described in the Quran as another potential outcome.
So it's this idea that terrible pressure, however horrific, can sometimes paradoxically forge incredible strength, spark change.
That seems to be the argument. And third, Zulm creates the conditions for the incredibly powerful prayer of the oppressed.
Ah, yes. The source highlights that hadith, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About there being no veil between the prayer of the oppressed and Allah.
Exactly. Without the experience of Zulm, this specific, direct, incredibly potent way of connecting with the divine, of seeking intervention, it wouldn't be activated in quite the same way.
That's a really profound point. It suggests that even in the midst of terrible injustice, there's a unique spiritual potential that's unlocked, according to this view.
It does. And it's really important to grasp a key distinction the source makes here. It's ontological, really.
Okay.
Zulm isn't presented as some evil that Allah actively created or desires or is pleased with. Not at all. It's described as wickedness that is permitted to happen because of human free will. It exists, filan, actually, in reality.
But Allah's rida, his pleasure or approval, isn't on it.
Absolutely not. It remains forbidden. A grave sin, no matter who does it, no matter who suffers from it.
Okay, so let me see if I'm tracking this. Free will allows it. Divine knowledge, Allah fully knows it, sees every detail. And divine wisdom frames it within these larger, difficult purposes like trial and awakening.
That's a good summary of the framework. And this framework, defined by al-Alîm and al-Hakîm, provides the certainty that this human freedom to oppress doesn't mean escaping accountability.
Right.
The source really emphasizes that everything done through Zulm, every bit of it, will eventually be brought forward as undeniable evidence.
And what about the oppressor themselves? Their fate? The source seems quite emphatic about consequences.
It leaves absolutely no room for doubt there. It pulls in numerous Quranic verses showing oppressors won't succeed, they won't be guided, they'll be deprived of Allah's mercy. And crucially, at that point, Allah never wrongs his servants in the slightest. The darkness of their Zulm is described in a hadith as manifesting literally as darkness for them on the day of judgment.
So that respite we talked about earlier, it's definitely not an escape clause.
Not even close. This source insists that for those who commit Zulm, a disgraceful end, a terrible fate, a vile death awaits them. It connects the certainty to other names of Allah, like Qahar, the subduer, and Jabbar, the compeller.
Implying that even in this world, consequences can catch up.
Yes, and that the ultimate reckoning in the hereafter is absolutely definite.
Okay, and flipping that coin for those who are oppressed, how does this framework offer them, well, understanding or perspective?
Well, al-Alîm, the knowledge of Allah, is presented as a source of deep comfort. Just knowing that Allah knows every single painful detail of what they're going through. Details the world might ignore or deny.
Yeah, that could be powerful.
And then al-Hakîm, the wisdom, it transforms the trial. It's not just meaningless suffering anymore. It can become, according to this text, fertile ground for immense patience, for spiritual growth, even martyrdom, for determined resistance, for strengthening community bonds. The oppressed, the source stresses are never forgotten. They're always in the divine presence.
The source even touches on how tricky modern forms of Zulm can be, right?
Yeah.
Systemic stuff, institutional,
Yeah.
hidden in data, maybe even legitimized through manipulation.
It does, and it argues that al-Alîm, that divine knowledge, sees through all those complex, often invisible networks of modern oppression just as clearly as any ancient tyranny. And al-Hakîm understands where this whole complex system is ultimately heading. The source points to history's seemingly invincible oppressors eventually falling as evidence of this divine justice playing out over time.
Right. So, okay, let's try and bring these threads together. Zulm is seen as this terrible reality, yes, but it's perfectly known by Alîm. It's framed purposefully within the wisdom of Elé, and it leads to certain consequences for the oppressor while offering maybe spiritual possibilities for the oppressed. So what's a core takeaway for someone watching this unfold, or maybe even living through it?
The source seems to call for a stance that avoids two extremes, not passive silence because that's seen as legitimizing oppression, but also not a kind of patience that just becomes idleness.
Inaction.
So something active.
An active, hopeful anticipation of Zulm's eventual end. And this hope isn't presented as wishful thinking. It's rooted in the certainty that Allah knows everything, Alîm, and has the power, guided by perfect wisdom, al-Hakîm, to ultimately make things right.
So patience in this view isn't just waiting around. No, it's active, it's resistance, maybe spiritual construction, shaping your own heart and actions towards justice, even when faced with the opposite.
It's framed like a darkness, but a temporary one, for an inevitable dawn.
That's exactly the feeling. The text concludes with that powerful image. Zulm is night, but it is not an endless night. Every darkness has a morning, every oppressor has an account.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive then, the source text we've walked through presents oppression, Zulm, as, well, undeniably harsh, a terrible reality, and yes, one of the gravest sins.
Absolutely.
Yet within this specific perspective, it's fundamentally framed as temporary. It exists inside a much larger, eternal reality, governed by these absolute divine attributes.
Yeah, the core takeaway, if you distill it from this text, seems to be this. Allah is absolutely Agim. He knows every hidden thought, every whispered plot, every tear shed because of Zulm. No exceptions.
Right.
And he is absolutely Hakîm. He acts with deep, ultimate purpose, even when the punishment for the oppressor doesn't seem immediate to us here and now.
And importantly, that delay, that respite, it isn't seen as God being indifferent. It's explained as serving these deeper divine purposes.
Like being a profound trial, yes, which, however hard, can build resilience, deepen faith, create meaning for those suffering.
While at the same time guaranteeing that the oppressor will face accountability. In this world, maybe through attributes like Qahar and Jabbar, and absolutely, definitively in the hereafter.
Exactly. So this perspective, it offers a framework for understanding. It sees Zulm not as proof of chaos or, a lack of divine care, but as a difficult, painful chapter within a story that is perfectly known, wisely orchestrated.
And ultimately heading towards complete justice.
That's the promise embedded in Alîm and Hakîm, according to this source. It provides a foundation for hope, and maybe most importantly, for guiding how one responds when faced with injustice.
Which really leaves us with something for you, the listener, to think about. If, as this source suggests, Zulm exists within this framework of absolute knowledge, Alîm, and profound wisdom, Hakîm, if it's presented even as a trial that can somehow bring meaning and hope, what does that imply about your own role? Your responsibility when you encounter injustice, whether you're seeing it from a distance or, God forbid, experiencing it yourself. How might this understanding of Alîm and Hakîm shape your response?